Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. I hope you are doing well and making progress with your stats analysis. After a while of being absent, I'm back with another video. Today, I want to start another series, a series that covers everything needed to do the statistical analysis of your thesis, starting from choosing the right test all the way down to how to interpret the results. So imagine you're in this situation, you have collected your data, it's sitting in an Excel file, and now you want to know how to analyze it. This video is the right first step for you. Before doing anything else, I want to mention something. In order to explain every step properly and realistically, we needed data sets, research questions, and realistic thesis projects. So we're going to introduce you to these imaginary research projects that we are going to deal with across all the videos that are going to be shared on this platform. So let's assume we're dealing with three scenarios: a psychology student, a public health student, and an environmental science student. At the first step, they may seem to have completely different research projects. Of course, their questions are different, their data are different, even their terminology is different. But when it comes to statistical analysis, they all follow the same fundamental process. And that's what this series is all about. We will follow these realistic thesis projects and learn how researchers move from a research questions all the way to result chapter. Let's first see what the questions are that each researcher is trying to answer. Maria is doing her master's in psychology, and her research question is, does imposter syndrome influence research confidence and academic performance? Second person is Ali. He's in health department and his project asks which demographic and lifestyle factors may predict hypertension. And finally, the last person is Josh. He's a researcher in environmental field and he wants to know which environmental factors influence urban air pollution. So as I mentioned, at the first glance, they seem unrelated, but they are all research questions that need evidence to be answered. Every research starts with a question. We collected data because we want evidence to get an answer and somehow be sure about it. So first, we need to understand what we are trying to learn. In each of these three questions, there are things that we want to explain based on what we have. In the psychology problem, we want to understand research confidence and academic performance. In the health research, we want to understand hypertension risk. And in the environmental science question, we want to understand air pollution levels. So these outcomes will become the focus of our analysis. And once we know what we want to explain, we can start thinking about the info that might help explaining it. That information that help explaining our focus, our outcome, are assistant variables and their attachments. As we all know, researchers rarely study a single variable in isolation. Instead, they ask what factors might influence this outcome, what variables should we measure, and what relationship might exist between them. So, these primary steps guide both data collection and statistical analysis. We're going through this framework before doing anything else. We start with a question, we identify the outcome, we measure relevant variables, and then at the final step, we use statistical methods to evaluate this evidence. In the next step, let's understand the roles that each variable play in the study. I would say think of variables as the pieces of information that we collect in order to answer the question. The interesting thing is that not all the variables play the same role. Some help explain the outcome, and some are outcomes themselves. And maybe some help us understand how or when relationships occur. Once we got the roles, choosing the appropriate analysis becomes much easier. Let's begin with the two most important types of variables. Almost every research study contains at least two key components. something we think may influence an outcome, and the outcome itself. The outcome is called the dependent variable, and the factor that may influence that outcome is called the independent variable. One way to remember this is to ask, what am I trying to explain? The answer is usually the dependent variable. Let's see how this looks in our three thesis projects. In our psychology project, we want to understand whether imposter syndrome influences research confidence and GPA or not. Imposter syndrome is one factor that may influence the confidence and maybe indirectly also influence their GPA. I want you to pay attention to something. If this first project, the psychology project, is a bit tricky and it's a bit complicated compared to others, we are going to explain what the other variables types are that we are going to deal with for this specific research question. But at this step, just stick with the dependent and independent variables, okay? So let's move on to the next project. In our health study, the outcome that we want to explain is hypertension. Easy. We want to know why some people develop hypertension while others do not. Age, BMI, smoking status, physical activity, and cholesterol level are all potential predictors. So these are independent variables because they may help us explain the outcome. And on the other hand, hypertension is the dependent variable because it is the outcome being studied. It is dependent on those variables, and its change is important to us. And finally, environmental studies follows exactly the same logic. We're interested in air pollution levels measured by PM 2.5. That's our outcome. We then collect information about traffic volume, rainfall, temperature, humidity, and wind speed at the same dates, days, or hours. These variables may help explain changes in air pollution. So that's why we're interested in them, and they serve as independent variables. Now I want to mention those types of variables that I said we are going to deal with in the psychology project. Sometimes a relationship is not that quite simple. Researchers are often interested not only in whether a relationship exists but also how it occurs. This is where mediators become useful. A mediator variable explains the pathway between two variables. I always say think of it as the middle step in a chain, okay? Let's get back to the psychology question. In case you forgot, the question for this project is, does imposter syndrome influence research confidence and academic performance? This means that the imposter syndrome may or may not reduce research confidence, and if it does, then consequently, lower confidence may contribute to lower academic performance. So, in this example, research confidence acts as a mediator because it helps explain how imposter syndrome affects GPA, right? Now, let's see another type of variable. Mediators explain how a relationship works, while other types of variables, which are called moderators, answer a different question. A moderator tells us whether a relationship changes under different conditions or not. So instead of asking how a relationship works, we're asking when is the relationship stronger or weaker. In our psychology project, imagine the imposter syndrome affects first year students completely different from final year students. In that situation, year of the study would be acting as a moderator because it changes the strength of the relationship. And finally, there is one more type of variable that researchers use frequently. Sometimes researchers want to account for variables that may influence the outcome, even though they are not the main focus of the study. These are called covariates. For example, If we are studying the relationship between research confidence and GPA, study hours might also affect GPA, right? Then we may include study hours in the analysis so we can better understand, we can better isolate the relationship we're interested in. In that situation, study hours acts as a covariate. So before we move on to the conclusion part, let me differentiate between these three types of variables that we just learned so that we don't confuse them. Mediator is a variable in a causal pathway. For example, does X affect M, then mediator affect Y. Moderator is like an interaction part. Does the XY relationship change at different levels of Z? And covariate is just an extra measured variable that we want to account for without testing a causal pathway or interaction. In conclusion, mediator is the how part inside of the story. Moderator is the when or whom changing part of the story. And covariate is anything else that matters but totally outside of the story and this relationship. So now let's bring all that we learned today together. We learned that although these projects come from different disciplines, the same idea appears repeatedly. Every study has a question that shed light on where we are going to and what we want to find out. Every study has outcomes, and most studies have predictors. Some studies investigate mediators, and some include moderators. And finally, there are places for covariates in some cases. Once we know our variables, we are ready to begin working with the actual data. In the next episode, we will move from research design to real data sets. We will begin exploring the three projects and learn how researchers prepare data before any statistical analysis. We do also the cleaning part of our data set before running anything else. So stay around, guys, for the next episodes. As always, thanks for watching. If you like this video, please push the like button. And if you have any questions, ask me in the comment sections below. Until next time.